Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar in a while. We took a little bit of a late summer hiatus to get together our fall lineup for you, and kicking it off for us is a really exciting and important one about curing the epilepsies and the role that each of you as caregivers, people living with epilepsy, people who have loved ones living with epilepsy, how you can play a role in helping set the benchmarks, the standards, and for research in the coming 7 years. So our let me do a couple of housekeeping things. I should have started with my name. I'm Gabi Conacher. I am mother to 7-year-old Elliot, who lives with severe epilepsy. I am the president of Wishes for Elliot and help and co-direct the Deep Connections Initiative, which is a partner of over 25 different rare epilepsy groups. And we're really excited that this webinar is being co-hosted with Deep Connections by the Epilepsy Leadership Council and the Rare Epilepsy Network. Which we'll have more information about. I'm going to put those websites into the chat so people can go ahead and visit those sites if you're interested. And today your host will be Amy Brin, who is the Executive Director and CEO of the fantastic Child Neurology Foundation. And she comes with a lot of passion for this work, and also is most recently what's the title for ELC now? It's should know what it is. What's the
Epilepsy Leadership Council?
Yeah, but what's the role that I can't remember, like director?
Oh, party host, chair, whatever you want to call me.
That's the word, chair. I mean, it is a word. Chair is such an abstract word. Sorry. So anyway, we're really excited for the discussion today. Amy's going to share some of her initial thoughts and then introduce you to the rest of our speakers. So Amy, off to you.
Great, thanks so much, Gabi, and great to see so many people joining in this conversation. I think Gabi was very kind in, kind of reciting all of those titles or hats that I wear, but I think the most important role that I play, and probably why Gabi and Jayada asked for me to serve as sort of this moderator in the next hour, is I have a real passion for holding space for people to have greater understanding and greater connection around really important topics. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today. You will be hearing about research and terms like benchmarks, and you're going to be hearing about, initiatives from the feds and a lot of different partners, and those may seem abstract and you may hear words that are the first time you're hearing them, but what I would ask you to do is just lean into this conversation, because the most important reason why we're having it is that we need each of you to engage in the process. This is this work that you're going to be told about today by these fabulous leaders that are joining us. It's a critical moment in our country for patients to involve themselves in this process, to make sure that in the process the needs and the reality of your lives, of the people that are caring for and living with epilepsy, are heard and integrated throughout. So this is truly a conversation for everyone that's joining us. And for sure, keep your questions and your comments flowing the whole time through the chat. I'm going to be working with Gabi and Jayada to cultivate those and make sure that I'm tossing them over to the appropriate speaker. But again, there's no fears here. There's no egos. It's okay if this is the first time you're hearing about this content. Just listen and engage, because we definitely want to hear from you. So with that said, I've got just a gang of really top-notch leaders and advocates here to join me in this conversation today. So I'm going to actually introduce all four, and then I'm going to open it up and we'll begin the actual program. So first up is Dr. Vicki Whitmore. Dr. Whitmore is a program director with the National Institute of Neurologic Disorders and Stroke, an institute within the National Institutes of Health. She oversees a grant portfolio that includes basic translational and clinical studies on epilepsy. These include grants on sudden unexplained death in epilepsy, or SUDEP, the genetic epilepsies, and seizure localization studies. In addition, she oversees a grant portfolio on myalgic encephalomyelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome, and fatigue. Her additional interests are in research on global health issues, stigma, and comorbidities. But to me, Vicki is one of those experts that you could have heard all of those words I just said and be very intimidated by her. But when you see her and you hear her, all that really shows up is a deeply kind woman who's passionate about serving those living with epilepsy. Next up is Dr. Ann Poduri. Dr. Ann Poduri is a clinician scientist focused on understanding the genetic causes of human epilepsy. She is a pediatric neurologist and the director of the programs in neurogenetics and epilepsy genetics at Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Poduri's role is to evaluate the contribution of epilepsy and its genetics to sudden death. Dr. Poduri serves as an expert for the Department of Neurology for Boston Children's Hospital Precision Medicine Service. I've had the pleasure recently of working with Dr. Poduri on an initiative here at the Child Neurology Foundation, and to me, she is the ideal recipe for a physician. She has exquisite clinical expertise with a pure heart for helping patients. Next up is Dr. Laura Lubbers, an action-oriented, highly collaborative neuroscientist and in vivo pharmacologist. Laura brings more than 20 years of experience to her role at Cure. She has led research projects and developed novel chemical entities to counter the effects of stroke, ALS, Alzheimer's disease, and Parkinson's disease, while expanding her expertise to other therapeutic areas with critical unmet needs, such as oncology and infectious diseases. Laura has a personal connection to epilepsy. Her sister Ellen was born with tuberous sclerosis complex, which caused her to have seizures starting at starting at 3 months of age. Laura's resume is also very impressive, as you can tell. She too could be perceived as intimidating until you see her smile, and then you know that she is here to help. Eileen Penn Miller has 20+ years experience in nonprofit management, strategic planning, and coalition building. Eileen currently serves as the volunteer director for the Rare Epilepsy Network, or REN, and advocacy co-chair on the 2020 NINDS Curing the Epilepsies conference. She has recently published the Rare Epilepsy Landscape Analysis and an editorial in Epilepsy and Behavior, Raring for Change. I can attest to Eileen's passion and commitment to helping improve the lives of those living with epilepsy. It's quite deep, no pun intended. So with that, let's get started. Vicki, you're up first.
Thanks so much, Amy, and thanks to all of you for being here today. I really appreciate your kind introduction. Thanks, Amy. So I do work at the National Institutes of Health and am a basic neuroscientist by training, but where my passion comes from is my family connection to epilepsy. So I have a nephew who is now almost 36 years old, who was also diagnosed with tuberous sclerosis complex when he was 3 months old and started having infantile spasms that were never brought under control. They were told, enjoy him, he won't live to be 5. He's, as I said, almost 36 and just an amazing young man. Autistic, nonverbal, very intellectually impaired, but just brings so much passion and warmth to our family. So the Curing the Epilepsies is a conference that started as Curing Epilepsy in 2000. And this was as a result of a connection that Susan and David Axelrod had with President Clinton, who actually issued an executive order to ask NIH to hold this conference. And that conference, although I wasn't in attendance at that conference, I've heard that it just completely changed the landscape for epilepsy research, from let's just find another drug to cover up the seizures to let's understand what's causing these seizures so we can really get to better targeted treatments and to ways in which we could hopefully one day prevent epilepsy. So what's happened since then is that every 7 years, NIH and NINDS in particular has organized a large conference now called Curing the Epilepsies, because we know it's not one epilepsy, there are several causes of epilepsy, where we bring together clinicians, investigators, patients, patient advocates, all coming together to revisit our progress in the field of epilepsy research and to say, okay, what progress have we made? what's next? Where do we need to really focus our efforts going forward? And what happened after the first conference was actually Dan Lowenstein, who's a physician now provost at UCSF, said, I think, you know, this is all well and good to have a conference, but the community needs benchmarks. We need ways to say, here's what we need to do, that we can come back and evaluate. Have we made progress? Not just, oh yes, we've found this mouse model or we've identified that ion channel, but what progress have we truly made? And so what's happened then, in conjunction with the Curing the Epilepsies conference every 7 years, is that these benchmarks have been revised. And so where we're at right now is that we, meaning the American Epilepsy Society Benchmark Stewards Committee, did extensive work to revise the 2014 epilepsy benchmarks. And I'm going to share my screen so I can show, oh, host is disabled participant screening. I can't share my screen. So on the NINDS website, you can go there and
right, sorry, Vicki, you should be able to now. I apologize. I thought that was disabled.
All right, here we go. So if you go to the website, you'll see this horrible picture of me in the video, but what you'll see is the 2020 Epilepsy Research Benchmarks. And this is a page that you can go to that describes the history. It provides the editorial and the progress reports that the Epilepsy Benchmark Stewards wrote, and then videos by each of the area leads for each of the 4 areas, and Anne's going to talk about that in a moment, as well as then a video that Laura Lubbers and Eileen Miller put together from the Epilepsy Leadership Council. What I should also tell you is that throughout this process, for the first time with this revision, we've included patients and patient advocates in the revision and the discussion of the epilepsy benchmarks. Previously, the only involvement they had really was at the conference, which was important, but we decided that this time we wanted involvement from the community from the beginning. So the epilepsy benchmarks are divided into 4 areas, and we've also worked to provide a plain language version that you can also access. So at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Anne to talk more about the actual benchmarks and the benchmark area specifically.
Thanks, Vicki, and thank you, Amy, for a very kind introduction. I'm really excited to be able to be here to work with all of you, and I will echo Vicki's sentiments that this is really a new era for the epilepsy research benchmarks. I was on the committee when Dan Lowenstein was one of the co-chairs, and I was on as a steward. And the way the committee had worked originally was that there were some senior luminaries in the field, and some of us who were more junior at the time were recruited to be stewards and to canvass the literature, to sort of do progress updates, provide updates on how things were going. And then, you know, as Vicki will tell you, the updating of the benchmarks was a sort of a collective updating that would happen at the meetings and would happen through literature review. And the involvement of the community of researchers and physicians was somewhat narrowly framed as the people who showed up to the conference. So not only was there not wide involvement of the ELC and other organizations, there really wasn't the wide reach across the clinician and researcher community that we really would strive to have today. So what we have now is a committee with a similar structure, but we also have, in addition to our partnership between NINDS and AES, we also have now representation from Eileen and Laura through the ELC, and active engagement in the process. And I will say that this has been something that has been a learning process for all of us. One thing that we've learned is that we need to give people, you know, more time than maybe we're accustomed to giving and getting when we want feedback on a document. And we've also learned that, you know, I think we have to preface some of our conversations by, you know, this is a rough draft version because, you know, as Amy was alluding to, we're all just people and we all start with a rough draft and we all work our way to what we hope is the best product. And what's different about the process now is that we've really had all of the different voices at the table from the beginning, not just here's the final product, you okay with this or not, but let's work on this together and bring our ideas together. So it's with that spirit that we really want to encourage involvement from the entire community. And so, what are these benchmarks? What are these areas that we're asking people to comment on? In the first, there's a campaign that will give you information about where you can publicly comment online, but the first campaign is really to elicit feedback on the working documents that we have. And we've published this already, but in terms of the updates, and we're trying to update and now publish a new set of area benchmarks. So let me tell you what these areas are. The first benchmarks area is understanding the causes of the epilepsies and epilepsy-related neurologic, psychiatric, and somatic condition. And this is an area where there's been a lot of progress, in part due to initiatives that grew out of some of these earlier meetings. So the genetics of epilepsy, the causes have soared. But I'll bring this back to my reality as I call myself a Tuesday afternoon clinician. Most of my patients still don't have specific causes for their epilepsy. And so we've got a condition that affects 1 in 26 people in their lifetime, most of whom still don't know why they have epilepsy. So even though we're working very hard and we've made a lot of progress in the last 20 years, we still have a lot of work to go. So that area pertains to genetics. It also pertains to other areas where we don't know as much about the causes, autoimmune epilepsy, for example, and other factors that might influence why and when somebody would have epilepsy, and also how we model these in animals and cell models and so on. So that's area 1, the causes, sort of a summary. Area 2 is preventing epilepsy and its progression. And that's an area where there has been some progress, but we all agree that there needs to be more. So when we can potentially figure out why somebody might be at risk for epilepsy, whether it's because of a genetic risk factor or a history of infection or a brain trauma, if we know that they're at risk, should we really be waiting for them to have epilepsy and then treat it, or should we be trying to prevent it? And that's really where we'd like to move the needle in this area, to take the knowledge that we've accumulated over many decades collectively and move towards preventing epilepsy and its progression and all of the other conditions that come with epilepsy. So area 1 is causes, area 2 is preventing, area 3 is improved treatment options for controlling seizures and epilepsy-related conditions without side effects. So it sort of gets at the core of our no seizures, no side effects, but it also incorporates the very well-recognized idea now that epilepsy comes with a lot of other conditions. And this is certainly a priority area going forward, where there's still a lot of work to do. And then finally, we have benchmarks area 4, limit or prevent adverse consequences of seizures and their treatment across the lifespan. And this is an area that's grown over time. The idea first that there's just epilepsy and seizures grew to epilepsy and associated conditions, and the idea that the treatments that we give to try to treat these conditions are often contributing to the problem are concepts that have evolved over the last several iterations of these benchmarks. And then this idea of across the lifespan is really key. And we've gone through many different waves in our field where there was a lot of attention mostly on adults, and the pediatric epileptologists felt neglected. And as a pediatric epileptologist, I'll say now I'm sometimes in committee meeting where people say, well, what about the adults? You're focusing on the children. And it's a community, and we want to make sure that everybody across the age spectrum from the beginning until the end is represented, and that there's a priority given to those who are represented among those of us who are here as physicians and researchers and advocates, but even more so those who are not necessarily here with us at the table, but who continue to have epilepsy. So those are the 4 major areas, and you'll find I put in the chat as well. I put a link to the website that Vicki mentioned, and that actually has all of this information in detail. But it's each of these different areas, these subtopics within epilepsy research that we've listed as priorities and that we're trying to develop. And we would really welcome your input in a number of different ways. One way would be just, yes, we think this is important. This is our most pressing priority. Or, hey, you forgot this one. What about this? Or you say you want to prevent side effects, but what about this type of side effect, and so on. So we would really like to hear from the community what are the pressing needs and issues, and what are the areas that we might not have mentioned. I think we've got a lot of them covered. We've had a lot of input from Eileen and Laura and colleagues, and from many of our physician and researcher colleagues, but there's always room for more, and that's why we've opened up the conversation. I'll pass it on now to Laura or Eileen, whoever's next.
I think actually we're going to go back to Vicki real quick, and Vicki, you're going to give us an overview about the idea scale, and I think maybe just give the audience a little bit of perspective on how to actually put forth the comments.
Right. So can you see my screen? Am I sharing here? So, yeah, so just again, by way of introduction of this tool, the way that the National Institutes of Health has traditionally collected information is we put out a request for information in the register and say, by this deadline, submit your thoughts about XYZ. And we get input that comes in from organizations, from individuals, that we then sort through and try to make sense of. But what we decided for this campaign was to take it public and to have it be more of a discussion and get feedback on a broader basis than what we receive when people just respond to a request for information, which sounds pretty formal. So we found this tool called Idea Scale. And if you go to the website, ninds.ideascalegov.com, you'll come to a page that looks like this. And so what this is, the NINDS community. So you'll see right here, you can see that there's the epilepsy campaign is listed here. Eventually, since we're actually piloting this and pioneering this for our institute, this is the first campaign that we've done. But eventually, if you come to this, you may see other campaigns listed there. So if you come to this for the first time, what you'll need to do is go up here and click on register, and it'll take you to a screen that looks like this, where you enter your email address and just click register. Since I've already registered, I'm not going to do that, and so I can log in. But what will happen next is that then you will get an email with a code number that will just ask you to verify your email. And so you click on that, you enter that number into the boxes, and you're entered in to the system as a member of the NINDS community. One problem that we encountered late last week was that some of the universities that have pretty significant firewalls are not allowing people to. What happens is they come in, they register, and then they're not receiving the email from the system. So if that happens to anyone, if you register and you don't get an email, then send me an email, and I'll put my email address in the chat. Because what we do then is we can go straight to the Idea Scale people, and they set up a temporary password that allows you to come in. So, and again, to reassure everyone, this is on what's called a FedRAMP platform, which means it's hyper secure. It's being monitored by our IT people at NINDS. So it's really a secure system. It's just that some universities that allow authentication and various things are just, I think, not allowing the emails to come back in from Idea Scale. So anyway, if I now go to login, what it looks like when you come to the login page is this. And by clicking on this, I agree, you're just agreeing essentially not to break any laws, not to put cuss words on the system. But anyway, if I log in with my email address, you'll come to a page that looks like this, which looks very similar to what you were seeing. And actually you're seeing a little bit more than you'll see because I'm one of the moderators. So you're seeing the Brain Initiative challenge here that's just in the works. But this is what the page will look like when you come to it. So you'll see on this page, you can see that there's people that have already started submitting ideas, and I'll come back to that. But the important thing to get to the campaign is to go over here to the right where it says 2020 Epilepsy Research Benchmarks. Click on that, and it will take you directly to the specific campaign. And if you click About Campaign, system's a little slow. Sorry about that. You'll come to, what happened? Oh dear, sorry. Here we go. You'll come to the campaign page where you can now see a description of the benchmarks with links to the NINDS website that I showed you and the link that Anne provided. And if you keep scrolling down, whoops, sorry, it will take you to what's called the campaign brief, where there's a video that describes what this is and gives you all 4 of those areas and benchmark areas that Anne was describing, as well as a link to the plain language summary here. And once you've reviewed this, all of this information here, then the way you actually interact and can submit your idea is to go to this big purple button and click on Submit New Idea, which then takes you to a page that looks like this, that again has all of the benchmarks plus the link to the plain language summary. And you'll come to now this area where it asks you to provide information about what area you're talking about. So let's say that I want to talk about, area 1, causes of epilepsy. Sorry, my computer is freezing up a little. Sorry about that. And I want to talk about the first one, let's say. Oh, it's doing something weird here, sorry. But anyway, so let's say I want to talk about the first one. And now I want to say that I think this is the most important. Sorry, I can't type today either. Research because, and you can put your comments here. You can keep scrolling down if my computer was cooperating. And so maybe that also relates to area 2B. So you can add that there. If you would like, you can add a link to existing research. You can add a paper or a document here by linking and browsing and adding that here. If you can add something, you can add a tag here. So let's say cause of epilepsy is what I'm most interested in. And you can see down here are already some links that other people have used. So say I want, excuse me, to add another comment about another idea, I would put submit another, but what I'm going to do is submit this idea. And that now goes to the moderators. So there are 3 moderators, myself, Andrew Breeden, and Miriam Leanders. And the only reason we're moderating is to prevent spam. So we're not going to change your message. We're not going to edit anything, redact anything. But what it allows us to do is to prevent anyone from coming into this and just putting in nonsense or information that's not related. And so what I can do, then I go to the moderators panel and I see my idea here, and I can go in and I can approve that, and it will now be, I'm not going to do that because it's a bogus one, but if I approved it now, then it would be automatically uploaded onto the website. So you can provide any information and feedback you want in this. There's a way for, if you don't want to comment on any of the specific benchmarks that are there, but you want to say you totally missed this, there's a way to do that. There's also a way for you to enter information and to send information by email. And so the reason we would like people to use this submission form is that what it helps us to do is when you are commenting on a specific excuse me, area, then it really allows you to, or for us on the back end, to track, sorry, excuse me, to track everything that's coming in related to Area 1B. And it just makes our lives easier on the back end. But if you feel as if your information doesn't really fit, but you still want to provide feedback, then that's absolutely fine as well. So let me just go back to home. And if I scroll all the way down, I believe is where here you can submit your idea via email. Excuse me. So I'll stop there while I'm coughing and turn it over to Laura so I can drink some water. But I hope you've all gotten an idea that it actually is, oh, sorry, pretty easy and straightforward to use the tool. So I'll stop there while I can get my breath back here again and turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Vicki, and I hope the coughing stops. That's very uncomfortable for sure. So I hope that was a useful overview. I know that these tools, this language, what we're trying to do here can seem intimidating, but really we want it to be used by our community. We really need that patient voice. So in fact, over the last 2 years, a group of patients and advocates have already been engaged, as we've already been talking about, to engage and contribute feedback on this whole process of revising the Epilepsy Research Benchmarks. As has already been mentioned, Eileen and I represent members of the Epilepsy Leadership Council, or ELC. And for those of you who may not know, the ELC is a coalition of nonprofit groups that weighs in on a variety of issues where we have a common bond, and clearly driving research is one of those. The ELC is really an amazing group that is intended to represent people with all forms of epilepsy. And this is truly one of the remarkable things about the epilepsy community, I think, is that we do have opportunities to come together and say, we've got a problem, we need to address it, let's tackle that together. And that's done through the ELC, which I forget how many member groups there are right now. Maybe Amy can comment on that.
56.
56. So that really is striking and remarkable. But yet we need not just ELC voices, but everybody's voice. If you're not a member of the ELC, that's okay. We need your voice desperately. As a family member myself, I know that there are issues that don't come up in the benchmarks that we need to be making sure that our researchers are aware of so that they can help us address them. So as a part of this process, the ELC, reaching out to the community, has already provided some consolidated feedback on the benchmarks that you'll be viewing in this idea scale tool. And we hope that represents broadly the issues that people with epilepsy face, but we recognize that there are gaps. In fact, talking with my team just this morning, we were coming up with gaps. We need to know what those are. We need life to be better by filling those gaps. So now it's your turn to contribute. But we recognize that this is challenging. This is put together by people who are very familiar with systems and the lingo, and we recognize that can be very intimidating. And so we have tried to develop additional tools to help so that you don't have to be familiar with the scientific lingo. You don't have to be up on all the latest treatments. What we want to know is, what are your personal challenges? So we hope to make this comfortable for you. We have put together, Eileen and I, and Vicki and Ann and other members have put together welcome videos to encourage you to learn more about this. We recognize that even just this hour-long webinar may not be enough to really grasp what we're trying to do here. So please go look at those welcome videos and get familiar with what we're trying to do here. We really want to inspire families and people affected with epilepsy to participate in this process. As has already been mentioned, there was also what's called a plain language summary that was developed. This is a summary of the benchmarks in what I think of as more digestible terms. Again, you don't have to know what all of the scientific lingo means. Hopefully this plain language version will help bring it closer to home and help you think about the different areas that the research is trying to tackle. I know that that's also available on the website, so do look for that, plain language summary. And finally, I know another member of our community is developing a short how-to video to help you navigate IdeaScale. Again, we're pretty accustomed to working online, but not everybody is, and I always think about this in the context of how can I help my mom, who's in her 70s, navigate this? Because we need to hear her voice. We need to hear everybody's voice in this process. So do look for those tools. We do want this to be comfortable for people. We do want to invite everybody from across the community to participate in this process. And while we welcome the comments on the specific benchmarks or the benchmarks as a whole, I think Eileen and I really are passionate about, and I know Vicki and Anne and Amy are too, but hearing about your daily challenges. They may not fit neatly into those benchmark areas, but we want to hear what your daily challenges are so that we can hopefully craft the research around those challenges and try to solve these difficult issues that we are all facing. Now, once this comment period is closed, and I can ask Vicki to fill in any gaps that I miss here, this input's going to be consolidated, and it will help refine these areas of the benchmarks that we are putting together. And ultimately, this and another crowdsourcing campaign, which hasn't opened quite yet, but hopefully Vicki will touch on this. We're hoping to use this to come up with the best areas to focus our research efforts and, importantly, the research dollars on. These ideas are then going to be brought together, and there's going to be a Curing the Epilepsies conference early next year, where we're really going to be wrestling with these areas, the research, and how to get to a better place for all of us who are impacted by epilepsy. This is an exciting event. I'm sure Vicki will share more information, but we want to invite you. It is going to be virtual and open to the public, and really important for helping us define the next 5 to 7 years of epilepsy research. Vicki, is there more that you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Laura. So this first campaign, as you've seen, is on these epilepsy benchmarks, and they pretty much cover the waterfront of epilepsy research. Not to say that there aren't things that are missing or things that should be emphasized more, and I think that's what we're looking for input. What is important to individuals with epilepsy or who care for people with epilepsy that really needs to come to the top of the list for research? And that's why we're then in next week going to launch a second campaign that will really look at what we're calling transformative research priorities. So not just the next grant that an investigator would submit looking at, okay, now that I have a mouse model on Dravet syndrome, how do I develop a treatment for that mouse? So not you know, that's all critical, important research that will continue and is critically important and is about probably between 70 and 80% of the kind of research that NIH funds on epilepsy. But what the next campaign will do is really look at what are transformative research priorities. So what is something that if we really put a big effort behind would truly transform epilepsy research and potentially care for individuals with epilepsy? So for those of you that are familiar, it's similar to thinking about the topics that we landed on after the last Curing the Epilepsies conference that turned into the initiatives that we called the Center Without Walls. So one of them was, the first one that was funded was actually on genetics, and went on to, in that Center Without Walls, they went on to identify not only many new genes that we know are responsible for causing epilepsy, but in that consortium really came together to understand how to analyze that data, how to move it forward, and really understand all that massive genetic information that they were getting, and went on now as an international consortium where not only, so the first one looked at 4,000 individuals with epilepsy. Now in what's called EPI-25, they're working with some genome centers to sequence the genomes from 25,000 individuals with epilepsy to really understand more. And so it's that kind of thing that if we really put a big effort behind could really move the field forward. So that campaign, like I said, will open next week and will look very similar to this campaign, but have a different flavor. And what we're hoping then from that is, so right now, again, the Benchmark Stewards Committee has come together and they have identified 10 different research priority areas. And what we're hoping through this crowdsourcing is that we can come to maybe 4 to 5 that we say, okay, these are really big deal. If we could accomplish these things, then we would really make a difference. And so when at the end of the campaign, which will end at the end of October, we'll take all that information and that will help to shape the conference, the Curing the Epilepsies conference that will take place in January. And what we're thinking is we will organize it in 4 to 5 mini workshops, each focused on one of those topics to really dig in and say, okay, if we put an effort behind this, how would that transform epilepsy? What would that look like? What would it mean for people with epilepsy and their caregivers? How would that help us to either find causes, find better treatments, prevent epilepsy? So that's sort of the path we're going down. And you know, as Laura said, your input is critically important because it's all of you who live with epilepsy. Either yourself or your loved ones, or you work for organizations that care about people with epilepsy. So that's why we're inviting all of you to participate.
I'll just add that I've already seen some really great comments coming up in the chat, and would certainly invite people who've made those comments to put them into idea scale. And I'll tell you, I'm not the most tech savvy person, but I was able, while Vicki was talking, to actually get in and not have my firewall block it. So if you have trouble, certainly reach out to us, but hopefully it will be pretty straightforward to be able to set up the account. It's pretty much instantaneous. So it took me as long as it was taking for Vicki to talk us through it. So there's some specific questions about gene therapy for TSC, and then a more general question about whether there's specific strategies or efforts to accelerate translation of basic research into clinical applications. And I think those are things that I was telling some of our colleagues from the AES. I sort of feel like those are such fundamental things, and I sort of look at what's out there and it seems like that's reflected already, but it's very clear that from our lenses, kind of sitting here having drafted a lot of this material, we might think that parts of what we feel is important are reflected, but when people come and say, hey, this part's missing, if it's not getting across to you, then it's missing, even if I meant it to be there. And so we really need to hear that feedback so we can make sure the important ideas that that we all hold dear are represented, but also that there may be some others that that we've missed. So these would be great things to put in as ideas, and we can figure out how to incorporate these ideas. I think, you know, the other thing I'll say is we've opened it up for discussion. This is sort of round 2 after a lot of going back and forth with the group on the call and with our benchmark stewards and so on. And, you know, our intention is not necessarily to vastly overhaul or rewrite these currently written out priorities, but there is room for myself and Vicki and Eric Marsh, who's the rising chair for the AES side of our committee, to incorporate some of the comments into the discussion that we put out along with the benchmark areas that we're going to publish in the next few months. So this is a perfect time to be doing that, to give us some feedback. But some of those ideas that may initially come through this first campaign, hold on to them and put them into the second campaign, because they might right now feel like a wrinkle on one of the areas, but it might actually be that you might explode your thought process into a much larger idea and want to pitch it as a transformative idea to the next campaign.
Great, thank you, Anne. I can't agree more with the importance of just engaging in this process. I think sometimes in life, when it's the first time that a new process is starting, we as humans almost allow ourselves to block, we get insecure or we don't know what's going on. So we say, oh, they already are thinking that, I'm not going to put this forward. So I'm going to ask the question to the panel, open to anyone to respond. All of you have been engaged in the space of epilepsy for many years, and in each of your comments you talked about how this set of drafting the 2020 epilepsy benchmarks was the first time that patients and advocates were engaged in the process, and how that was you've already seen the difference. Could you share a story about maybe an anecdote or a piece of input that maybe Laura or Eileen you put forward that you saw change maybe the ideation around a benchmark, just again to really help people see how much their interaction engagement in this process can really change?
Sure, I would love to comment on that. I think when we saw some of the first drafts come through and the ELC working group on this took a look at them, we recognized that surgical approaches to treatment weren't really called out. I mean, this is a really promising area for actually curing some epilepsies, and having more advanced approaches to doing surgical treatments would certainly help, and it wasn't really called out. So this is just one example of a parent thinking, you know what, my child just had this procedure and it really worked, and I don't see it called out anywhere. Is this an area that should be thought about? That's one example that comes to mind. I'm sure I can think of others, but if others want to contribute.
I'll add one area that I thought was really quite meaningful and I hope will be impactful, and that's as we were doing our reviews of each area, sort of a progress report on the field of, how did we do in area 1 and finding causes, and area 2 and 3 and 4, they sort of read like grant progress reports in a way in the past, and they were sort of a compilation of what was out there in the literature. And what's new this time around and what we published last year was that they each start with a vignette. They start with a story from somebody in the community about why this matters. So it is the language of these articles that are all, there are links to them on the NINDS website and in the idea scale. It is pretty abstract. It's really sort of more written in a way with current and future researchers in mind, because we want to sort of organize our thoughts about what the priorities should be. But the why we care part of that really comes off in the vignettes. And it's not just why we care as people, but it's also why we should care as researchers. Why, if there's 100 projects we might want to do, why would we possibly think about this set of projects? Well, because it actually is people at the heart of it, and it's people whose lives matter. And we all have an abundance of riches. We say there are hundreds of things that we could focus our research on. For those of us who are engaged in translational research that's patient related, it's very, very helpful and meaningful to be able to say, not just, the researchers think this is important, but that people, actual people out there living their lives think that this is important and this area is important because of their life experience. I think that's going to have impact. And I hope this is a new trend that we can continue to keep going, not just with Curing the Epilepsies and with the NINDS benchmarks, but in general to bring that voice into the room.
Anybody else have an anecdote or an example?
Well, I'll just add a couple of examples that actually occurred at the conference at the previous conference, when we were in a breakout session, and Anne already mentioned this, and people said, well, what about everything else that goes along with epilepsy besides seizures? They were totally missing from the previous version of the benchmarks. So that was added, as well as SUDEP, sudden unexpected death, and other causes of mortality associated with epilepsy. So those are things where having patients and patient advocates in the room at the time helped to make those revisions, and partly why we were so driven to have people involved in those discussions from the very beginning with this set of revisions.
Yeah, thanks, Vicki. I mean, I can't agree more. I think the more we can have transparency and more stakeholder involvement, usually then the truth, the right thing that needs to happen kind of gets illuminated. So I'm going to actually stick with you, Vicki, on my next question. And I'm also a big fan of kind of pulling back the curtain and letting people kind of know how the sausage is made. It sometimes, builds trust and their comfort level. So I think it was great how you walked us through the ID scale, but can you tell us a little bit more about, once you all close that down, who's looking at the comments, and also just the nuts and bolts? I mean, do you want people to share a personal story, or do you want a comment with literature always attached? I mean, what are you really expecting from people? How do you want them to put their input forward?
No, excellent question. So when the campaigns are finished, what will happen is all of that input will come back to Ann and I and Eric and the Benchmark Stewards Committee, where we'll look at all of the input we've received first from the revised benchmarks. And those, I think, will be fairly easy to wrap up and finish up. The bigger discussion then will be around what sort of rose to the top of those transformative research priorities, and how should we shape the conference in January. And so, you know, we'll loop the ELC into those discussions as well as we think through how we're going to form the sort of mini workshops and what the topics will be around each of those, how those mini workshops will look in January. So I think, you know, at this point, I think what we're looking for is input as to what's important to you. What, you know, if I saw somebody's comment, as you mentioned, on gene therapy for tuberous sclerosis, if, you know, I think we're not going to drill down to a specific genetic disease, but I think one of the important areas may be, what about gene therapy for all of the genetic epilepsies? Instead of taking it one genetic epilepsy at a time, how could we all come together as a community and say, how can we move this forward from animal models through translation into patients? So, you know, I think those kinds of, this is important to me because my child isn't controlled by any medications, and gene therapy might be helpful. Those kinds of, that kind of input's really, really critically important.
Great. So it can be a simple statement. It doesn't have to be something lengthy and supported by evidence. Great.
Does not, no.
Okay, we've got time for one last question I'm going to ask. I'm going to turn it back over to Gabi, and I'm going to again open this up to the whole panel to comment. As I know, everyone on this panel wears multiple hats. I'm looking at the attendee list right now, and the majority of people on this call are advocacy leaders. So they are representing possibly a single genetic disease, a form of epilepsy. What would be your recommendation to them about how to carry this forward? Should they individually put a letter together? Would it be helpful for them to poll their disease community to ask for priorities or comments, and then they synthesize that and be able to maybe make one submission but say, hey, this is representative of 200 people. Are you taking into consideration the amount, like the N behind a comment? Why don't you this is your chance, give them your wish list of what you want them to do to help you do this Herculean lift for our community.
So I would advocate for all of it. We want to hear voices. And it really depends on what your abilities are as leaders. I think, you know, pushing this out to your community to make them aware of it, how important this is that voices be heard and how much we want to hear them. If you're able to convene groups, convene your SAB, convene a committee to think through it, that's wonderful. But I know we are all stretched. And I think, you know, we've, through this last 2 years process, we've taken a variety of approaches. And it really depends on what your abilities are in terms of your time. But at the end of the day, we want to hear from the community broadly. So if it's as simple as pushing this out, pushing the information that has been put together out to your communities, making sure that they are aware that that we want to hear from them, that's certainly a viable path. Bringing people together to convene is also viable. At least that's my experience and my recommendation.
Anybody else?
Sorry.
Any
Yes.
final words?
Yeah, so I'll just echo, I absolutely agree with what Laura just said. And, you know, what wouldn't be helpful is 200 of the same form letter, essentially. But hearing your story or having you write in and say, 50 of my parents think this is important, or what people who are involved in my organization. Because, you know, I can't speak for other funding agencies, but at NIH, we don't necessarily fund based on the number of patients. We fund based on scientific opportunity and where there's a scientific need for research. So, you know, all voices will be heard, and we want to hear in whatever format. We want to hear from you in whatever format you're comfortable providing that feedback.
Great, thank you. And I see in the chat, there's a couple of more ideas about how that data could be correlated. So just for the sake of time, know that the panelists are hearing your feedback, and we'll take that back for further consideration. So before I turn it back to Gabi, I just want to again thank the panelists so much for bringing your expertise and your heart to this conversation. And on behalf of the Epilepsy Leadership Council, I would really want to thank the members of ELC that have joined Eileen and Laura in this work. Really fabulously representing us on the work group. Really couldn't do it without everybody. I'm a big fan of Rising Tides Lifts All Boats, and this is another example of coming together as a community, how we could change the tomorrow for our patients living with epilepsy. So thank you so much. So with that, Gabi, I think you get the closing words.
There we go. Thanks. Thank you so much. This was an incredible panel, and I feel personally so much more prepared to go in and comfortable that this is not something that has to be, you don't have to have a PhD to do this. You don't have to, you know all of the lingo. It's just about sharing our experiences and our hopes and our wishes for our children and loved ones who struggle with epilepsy. Excuse me. So I'm just briefly going to let's see, that's the wrong one. So thank you to all of our panelists. You guys are amazing. You do incredible work. We're so grateful to have you as part of this community, and Amy for being our fearless moderator through all of this. So before we go, I just want to share a few things. As I mentioned, we took a hiatus for during August, and we have been really very busy planning a really exciting fall lineup. These are just the ones that are confirmed so far. We have a 4-part series on the ABCs of clinical trials with fantastic folks from NIH, from pharmaceutical companies, hopefully from FDA. We're hoping it'll be a really incredible lineup. The first one is September 21st. These are all Eastern Standard Time. Also, our friends at Duke 15Q have shared, they have access to this film, Intelligent Lives, which is about intellectual disability and the history, the oppression, the challenges, and kind of really creating new space that engages these communities and gives them opportunities to fully live their lives. It's really a powerful story. And we're going to split it in 2 showings with panels after each one that we would love for you to come and engage with us as well. We heard loud and clear from this community that SUDEP is a huge concern. And so we also have a several-part series on SUDEP. The first one being, what do we know? It's a brief overview of kind of what information, research, data exists. And we'll go from there to continue talking about prevention, monitoring, and having a panel of parents really share their concerns around that. And the last one that we have on the calendar for now, more coming, is could a VNS help? And this is going to be really exciting. We know a lot of people are always asking, how does VNS work? Is it a good option for my child or for my loved one? So we're really excited to bring that on October 27th. We'll have more coming soon. Please make sure that you follow us on Facebook and Twitter to hear the latest. And before we go, when the window closes, you'll see a brief survey pop up. Please give us some feedback and let us know how we're doing and how we can do better. Thanks again to all our panelists and our moderator, and take care. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.